Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Module 6 lecture for marijuana. This is part 1 of a 3-part lecture series. We will be talking about sort of the same format that we've started to take now that we're getting into the substances. We'll have an introduction to marijuana, understanding of absorption and elimination. Then part 2, we'll talk about short and long-term effects of marijuana use, and then we'll conclude with a mini lecture on dependence and withdrawal and marijuana in the DSM. So again, this is part 1 of 3. We'll be talking about absorption and elimination and a little bit of the basics of marijuana. So some general info, marijuana is the most widely used illegal drug in the US, although the use is going down. It is still the most commonly used illegal drug. It's most used by individuals aged 18 to 25. There are hundreds of compounds in marijuana, and there's 61 compounds of those that are unique to cannabis. Cannabis is the plant, and I'll talk about this distinction in a moment. But cannabis is the scientific name of a plant, and marijuana is it's the common name for drugs that are derived from the cannabis plant. And so what's important here is that delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, is a psychoactive ingredient in marijuana that is derived from the cannabis plant. So a cannabis plant has THC in it, and then different marijuana products are made and created from the cannabis plant. And delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol is just one of hundreds of cannabinoids that are found in the cannabis plant, but it is the one that is psychoactive. It is the one that has an effect on the user's mind. In the 1960s, the THC content of marijuana, the psychoactive component, was about 0.2%. And today, it ranges between 5 to 18%, sometimes as high as 60%. We'll talk about that in a moment. So you're looking at 25 to 40% more potent marijuana than it was in the 1960s. And that's due to a variety of reasons. The growing of the plant itself, selecting for plants that have higher levels of THC, but then also the way that THC is extracted from the plant. The techniques have developed some ways to get more THC content out of the plant. So, as I mentioned a moment ago, the cannabis plant that's a scientific name for a plant. The root of the plant does not have any THC in it. The stalk of a cannabis plant, it's sort of this kind of like leafy, bushy looking plant. The stalk is very fibrous, and those fibers can be processed and used to make rope or clothing, or even paper. It's called hemp when it's made in that way, and there's very little THC in the stalk of the plant. Similarly, in the branches of the plant, very little THC. The THC really resides in the leaves and in the buds and flowers of the plant. So in male plants, there's 5 leaflets. In female plants, there's 7 or more. There's moderate levels of THC in the cannabis leaves. And then in the budding part of the plant and the flowering part of the plant, for male plants, there's very little THC. But when a female plant is pollinated, the buds and the flowers that are produced have the highest THC content. And so marijuana is made from the leaves and the buds and the flowers of the cannabis plant. Hemp is made from the stalk. And so that's a little bit more about the relationship between cannabis and marijuana. So marijuana, again, is just sort of an umbrella term for any form of cannabis-derived drug. And the most common range of THC in marijuana is about 5 to 8%. And then there's a lot of different varieties of cannabis. Bang is a drink that's made of the dried leaves and branches that has very low THC. It's popular on the Indian subcontinent. Hashish is resin from the hairy stalks of female buds. So on the cannabis plant, the budding part of the plant uh, has these sort of stick-like protrusions from the bud, and they have little hairs on them, and the hairs have little resins and little oil droplets. And so hash is collecting that resin and then drying it into balls or cakes. And there's quite high THC content in hashish, about 10%. Hash oil crystals are made from extracting the THC content from, again, those hairy stalks. So it's this very highly processed uh, product that comes from the resin, and it can be mixed with ether to form this kind of liquid or crystals. This has the highest THC content of any cannabis derived drug, are hash oil crystals. Sinsemilla is a seedless form of marijuana from an unpollinated female plant, so that's going to have about 10 to 30% THC. Um, Thai sticks is another form of marijuana. It's sort of like a marijuana cigar. These are becoming more popular as marijuana is made legal for recreational purposes. There's a market that's opening up for uh, sort of luxury marijuana products, and these marijuana cigars or Thai sticks are one of those, where the buds of marijuana are strung onto a bamboo stick and then wrapped in a marijuana leaf. So kind of like how tobacco is stuffed into a tobacco leaf to make a cigar. That's what's happening here, but with marijuana. And then when it's smoked, the bamboo stick is removed, so there's a hole that people can smoke through. And then also, in addition to cannabis derived marijuana, THC can also be synthesized in a lab, like a chemistry lab. And so there are two pill forms, Marinol and Sesamet. They're used in the treatment of cancer. And then Satinex is a spray form of synthetic THC, and that's used to treat multiple sclerosis. Marijuana and THC are really hard to classify in terms of what type of drug they are. It's really just kind of in a league of its own. It has a bunch of different effects on the central nervous system. It creates this kind of relaxation effect, and so in that way, it's similar to depressants. It can energize and activate the appetite and the GI system, and so in that way, it's similar to stimulants. It can have an analgesic or pain relieving element to it, and so that is related to opiates. And then also at really high doses, there can be some hallucinogenic qualities. People can have a disruption in their sensations and their perceptions. So it's really not limited to any one of these classes of drugs. We really would put marijuana in its own class. Marijuana gets into the body in a variety of different ways. So it can be drank in liquid form. If the leaves or flowers are, that's a typo, it should be leaves or flowers are steeped in cannabis tea. It can be ingested through food. So THC is fat soluble, so it can be dissolved in oil or butter, fatty substances, and then cooked into food. Um, it can be smoked, and when it is smoked, they're just the same way that when you combust nicotine, tobacco leaves to get nicotine, you combust this plant material. You light it on fire and you breathe in the smoke. There's a release of chemicals happening from that combustion. THC is just one of them. And then also through vaping. So similar to how vaping occurs with nicotine as well, THC is dissolved in oil and then that oil is heated to vaporize and inhaled. Smoking it would be the most common form of how people use marijuana in the United States. It's absorbed into the bloodstream through the lungs, and it can be minimized or maximized depending on how the user inhales the smoke. So long, deep inhalations are really going to increase that THC absorption into the bloodstream. And so you could have someone who's had a lot of practice, who's a more experienced smoker, um, smoke the same amount that somebody else smokes who hasn't smoked as often. And that person who's more experienced at smoking is going to have more levels of THC enter their bloodstream because of this kind of practice effect that happens with smoking marijuana. And I mentioned a moment ago, the combustion releases thousands of chemicals, and that many of the chemicals are very similar to what happens when tobacco is lit on fire. But there really are no definitive studies linking marijuana to lung cancer. So even though a lot of the chemicals are the same, no one can really account for why it is that people who smoke marijuana chronically they don't have a link to lung cancer. Marijuana or THC enters into the bloodstream and reaches the brain very quickly in about 10 minutes. So the effect is felt fairly quickly. Um, and then it takes longer to eliminate. So it reaches the brain on the order of minutes, but then it leaves the brain within a few hours. So about 1 to 3 hours is how long the high will last. But because it's so fat soluble, THC can accumulate in other organs. And so total elimination from the body can take days or weeks. So it's a quick entry and a slow elimination. And THC very easily crosses the placenta to reach a fetus in pregnant women. THC is also ingested through food, and so compared to smoking, because the marijuana is moving through the digestive system, less THC is going to reach the brain, and it's going to take longer to get there because it has to move through the digestive tract and metabolic processes. So it's broken down in the stomach, and it's a little bit is absorbed there. Some is absorbed in the small intestine, but then that blood goes to the liver before it goes to the rest of the body. And so the liver starts to break down THC before it reaches the brain. And so because of that slower release, the drug can stay in the user system longer. So compared to smoking, someone may feel high for a longer time when they eat cannabis products. Um, so it can mean a sort of slow, gradual high, and it also, though, can mean that someone's more likely to have hallucinogenic experiences because of that. Um, uh, Usually it's ingested at larger quantities than it is smoked. So there's just more THC that gets into the system because people eat more than they smoke. Another thing that happens when folks eat marijuana is that there's a latency of period. So because it takes longer to reach the brain, someone can eat a marijuana product and they don't feel high for something about it takes about an hour to kick in. And so in that time, maybe they think it's not working and they either they eat more or they take marijuana in another form, maybe they smoke, and then they're high from the short acting form of marijuana, and then the food kicks in, and so now they're doubly as high as they had intended to be. So that's also why people end up eating more cannabis product than they do smoke it. um, Getting out of the system, so the high, the feelings of being intoxicated from marijuana can wear off, but the THC can stay in the system. So the THC can be converted in the liver to other compounds, and some of those compounds can have psychoactive effects lasting for a few days. Sometimes this is called an afterglow, and it's contrasted to something like a hangover from alcohol. But it is similar in that the liver is breaking down the substance into turning it into this metabolite or a different compound that's having an impact on the body. Um, And because THC is fat soluble, it's easily absorbed and stored in body fat. And so it can stay in the system for a really long time, and it's released and eliminated from that fat slowly. And so someone could test positive on a drug test for marijuana weeks after using it because it's stored in their fat reserves. There's also some anecdotal evidence that folks who are chronic marijuana users who maybe they have not used marijuana, but they have so much stored in their fat that they exercise and they burn fat, and then the THC is released into their system, and they experience an intoxicating effect just because it's still in their body. That's it for lecture one. We'll talk more about marijuana in the subsequent lectures. This is one of three.